Hello, everyone. I'm here to discuss the border wall. So, I just read in the news that it seems that the committee in Congress are negotiating a deal, compromise of some sort, that $1.7 billion is going to be authorized for barrier spending, and that is in line with previous allocations for mostly enhancements, but possibly also extensions of the wall. So this is significantly less than what Trump had asked for. He asked for 5.7, but this is what is being reported this is supposedly the compromise, that he's going to get 1.7. Again, that is the same number that he previously got per year for border/fence expenditures. Okay, so the question is, if I were Trump, what would I do here? Would I accept it? Would I veto it? Would I declare a national emergency and spend 5.7? What are my options here? What would I do? So first, let me first establish why the wall is important. So there are three arguments that Trump's opponents use to dismiss the wall. One is that it's too expensive, they say. Second is it's ineffective. And third is that it's cruel. So let's tackle each one of them separately. First one, the wall is too expensive. Now, the people who are susceptible to this type of argument tend to be almost invariably are either like really stupid people or ignorant or both. Because the fact of the matter is that the Department of Defense, the federal branch, or I should say the federal department within the government that is responsible for this sort of thing, which is, defending the border, defending the nation, defending the border, etc. They're operating on a $700 billion a year budget. $700 billion a year. Now think about it. Where does all this money go? Okay, fancy airplanes, obviously all the armed forces, everyone who's in the armed forces gets paid, and Department of Veteran Affairs, and all the deployments, all the aircraft carriers, all the bombs, and all of that is included in that number. And of course, most of it's hardly ever goes towards defense. A lot of it is aggression. A lot of it is foreign entanglements, including foreign aid. And it's difficult to draw the line, to draw the nexus between that expenditure and actually defending the nation. This $5.7 billion is the most relevant, the most germane to actual defense. Actual defense. I mean, the correlation between that and actual defending the border or defending the nation is just so high, it cannot get any higher, and it's a pittance compared to all the other expenditures. And so for anyone who's saying that we can't afford it, well, you should look over the other items in the budget that are allocated for supposed national defense, and let's start with those before we get to this. So that's what I would say regarding that argument. Secondly, it's ineffective. That's nonsense. Of course it's effective. Every border that has been built recently by any nation has worked. I mean, the most prominent and recent example is Israel's border, first in the north against Gaza, but later, I think by now they've completed the border also in the south against immigrants from Africa coming through Egypt seeking asylum. And they work. I remember I was in Israel when the suicide bombings were almost a daily affair, and then when they completed the wall, it dropped. It completely disappeared. So it really did work, and so there are plenty of other examples as well. Although I'm not personally familiar with them, but I know that there are plenty of other examples. And so yeah, they work. Of course, they work. And anyway, the people who say they don't work, what do you mean they don't work? There's a 30-foot high wall and it doesn't work. Like, what do Can you magically cross a wall that's actually in front of you? Of course not. So of course they work. Now, if you're gonna do it in a deliberately uh, clumsy way, as in like, yeah, sure, let's let them throw ladders up the wall and let them just climb up and in, up and over, and nobody will say anything or do anything, then yeah, maybe it will be ineffective. But that's not the plan. The plan is to actually defend the wall, right? Which means we're going to have agents that are going to be there, they're going to monitor it, and they're going to intercept, or better yet, not allow people to actually climb over it. So yes, it will work. So that's nonsense that it won't work. Thirdly, is that it's cruel. That's also a very ridiculous, preposterous argument, because for one, we are, as a nation, we already have an extremely generous immigration policy for people who are suffering. If you compare America to any third world country, then America comes out far ahead. I mean, third world countries don't have this type of category of admitting people because they're refugees. I mean, this is a modern, and also the United States didn't have that as of, let's say, 70 or 80 years ago, before World War II, really. And so this is something that is a modern innovation, and it is based and driven by compassion. So we are already a very compassionate country to be admitting so many tens of thousands of people on a humanitarian basis every year. But more importantly, the reason it's a preposterous argument is that you don't make this argument that it's cruel without addressing the legal basis of this. I mean, who operates like this? Imagine we had a big controversy surrounding speeding, right? And some people are saying, no, we need to revisit the ways cops enforce speeding and how big the fines are and when and how they pull people over, etc. And imagine somebody says, oh, no, we shouldn't be doing this. Cops shouldn't be pulling people over. It's just cruel. It's just cruel to pull people over. Like, imagine this. Is this like a real argument? Are you for real? I mean, this is something that a second grader would make in school. Oh, it's cruel. I'm against cops pulling people over. Because, I mean, in a legal system, if you believe that it shouldn't be done, then you legislate against it. If you believe it should be done, you legislate for it. And I mean, it's so easy to do. Congress is there. That's what they're getting paid for. Just make a law. I mean, the law's already there. All you got to do is just update it, revise it. Revise the numbers. I mean, if you think there's a particular demographic that needs a greater quota of admission because of their suffering that they're undergoing, then sure, let's revise it. I'm all open. I'm all ears. Let's sit down and debate it and haggle over this. So, but contravening our national laws because of some emotionally driven sentiment is nonsense. So okay, so now that we've debunked all these myths, now let's get to the crux of the question. So now that we know that the wall, that the expenditure of the wall is reasonable within the larger scope of defense expenditures, we know that it's effective, we know that it's proper, we know that it's morally right. So now let's get to the second part of this monologue, which is, what would I do if I were Trump? So here's the problem here. So it's a multifaceted problem. One is that, okay, so I'm basically conflicted here. On the one hand, I was elected by people who want me to build this wall. And for good reason. People want this wall because illegal immigrants take jobs away from Americans. It's the simplest and truest reason. That's the real reason why we need the wall. We as American citizens, are entitled to good jobs and a good quality of life. And when we have illegal immigrants coming in here in an extra legal, undocumented fashion, and they underbid us for jobs, then it certainly drags down our standard of living and even our ability to even earn a livelihood. And so that's a big problem. And so the legitimacy of Trump's constituency demanding a wall is sound. So the question here is, if I'm Trump, what do I do here? Because on the one hand, I want to fulfill the promise that I made to my constituency. On the other hand, I don't have a good way of doing so. Why? Because Congress is not really working with me. Now, it's important to note here that the Republicans, the establishment Republicans, that is, are not really helping Trump on this. They're really apathetic and indifferent about this whole thing, and they are. I mean, supposedly they're negotiating, but I don't know how hard they're trying, and it's pretty evident from the news that just came out tonight, which is that they came up with a $1.7 billion thing, which is way lower than it should have been, especially considering that the president is from the Republican Party and the Senate is controlled by the Republican Party. So they definitely should have come up with something much better than this. So the fact that the Democrats have the upper hand here definitely shows that the Republicans are not really trying very hard. And the reason for that is, again, because a large component of the Republican Party is not really on Trump's side. So given that, and Trump knows this, everyone knows this, everyone who's really savvy and tuned into the political sphere knows this maxim, this reality. And so the question is, so on the one hand, I want to fulfill the promise I made to my constituency. On the other hand, Congress is not cooperating, and they're not giving me the legal authority to build the wall. Now, let's make it very clear here before I proceed that the proper legal vehicle for building this wall is Congress. Now, a lot of people are saying, oh, what about his commander-in-chief? And isn't he authorized and allowed by the Constitution to act unilaterally on matters of defense? And the answer is, not really. In my opinion, it might pass legal muster if he declares a national emergency, or even if he doesn't declare and he just does it because he believes that that's what his duty as commander-in-chief. It might pass legal muster, but that was not the intent of the authors of the Constitution. The intent was that he would defend the country when it's not practical or possible to bring a matter before Congress. So, for example, if somebody, let's say North Korea, were to shoot a missile against the United States, and the proper way of doing this would be, to strike back or to do a major operation in North Korea that could destroy the country or could destroy many civilians, etc. An action like that would not require congressional approval. Like, we're not going to wait. It wouldn't be possible or practical to wait because it requires immediate action. So this is clearly authorized by the Constitution as commander-in-chief, because remember, commander-in-chief, they make decisions on the battlefield. So the equivalent of that in modern times is when Congress does not have time to evaluate and authorize the commander-in-chief's actions. But a case like this it doesn't fall into that. There's plenty of time for Congress to act on this, and so it would not be proper, based on the original intent of the Constitution, for the president to launch this type of action without congressional approval. So again, if not legally questionable, it's definitely morally questionable based on the original intent of the Constitution. So the other option is to veto, right? So he could veto it. And if he vetoes it, then there's another shutdown of the government, right? So there's no spending bill. So we go back, we revert to square one. Tens of thousands of federal workers are laid off, are furloughed, not laid off, but they're furloughed and they don't get paid. And so on. So should he do that? So in my opinion, if I were Trump, I would do that, because like I said, I feel very uncomfortable doing something that goes against what the founding fathers, the framers of the Constitution, had in mind with the executive powers that were granted to the president. So that's what I would do. And like I said, it's a close call, because it's not very obvious that's, I think that declaring an emergency and for the president to take unilateral action is definitely something to be considered. I mean, the way it could be argued or it could be interpreted is that Congress is basically not acting. So imagine if you asked the founding father, what if there is in fact a national emergency, but for whatever reason Congress is twiddling its thumb? Then what does the commander do? Now, if Congress were to specifically say no, then certainly the commander-in-chief can't do anything, right? But in the absence of them saying anything, right, they're just not doing anything, they're not taking action, then the commander-in-chief it could be argued that he can and perhaps even should do something, even if Congress isn't specifically authorizing him to do so. So it is arguable both ways. But nevertheless, I prefer the inaction here because I am of the opinion and of the ideology that I'm a very narrow constructionist of the Constitution, and I prefer inaction to action. And so, if Trump doesn't do anything and something bad happens, he can always blame Congress for it, and he should, because that is, in fact, their primary responsibility to pass such type of legislation. And if they don't want to do it, whether it is just because it's him, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of it is driven just by that, the fact that they hate him, and anything that he proposes, they'll shoot down, or whether it is ideologically driven, whatever the case may be, ultimately the responsibility rests on their shoulders. And so ultimately, I am okay with Trump just simply signing the bill and then doing the best with what he is given, with whatever money he is given by Congress for the wall / fence / barrier, whatever you call it, and then just go with it. So thank you everyone for watching. I hope this helps, and have a good night.